Welcome to the first ReVeAL webinar. ReVeAL project started last summer and goes on to 2022, and it's a Horizon 2020 research project. It stands for Regulating Vehicle Access for Improved Livability. And the title of this first webinar is ReVeALing Space for People, Developing Good Practice for Urban Access Regulations. The idea of the ReVeAL is to help cities make good practice access regulations and giving them the tools to do that. A few organisational things first. You're muted by default, with many webinars. In case we do have time for live questions, and also in case you are using the dial-in by phone, we cannot unmute you unless you use the audio pin. And if you've dialed in by phone, you should have an access code and an audio pin. Just participation tools, as you said, as I said, we've been automatically, we've power over you. We've muted everybody. If you want to raise your hand and ask a live question, there's a live question hand. But please, more importantly, ask questions whenever they occur to you. If it's a clear, a simple clarification, Bonnie may be able to jump in and explain it, or she'll collect the questions at the end. We're going to try some participation, so there'll be a number of polls throughout the webinar. That'll be the blue box here. Who are we as ReVeAL? ReVeAL has got 6 pilot cities: London, Victoria-Gasteiz, Helmond, Bielefeld, Padova, and Jerusalem. We support partners from around Europe. It's also featuring the CLARS website, urbanaccessregulations.eu, which website I run, with full information on over 700 current access regulations in Europe. If you haven't looked at either of the websites, I'd encourage you to do so. And you'll also find the information for the 12 further webinars that we're doing over the next 2 years. So watch this space. Hopefully you see 4 faces, mine and our 3 colleagues. The agenda today is you're nearly at the end of my introduction, Lucy Sadler Consultants, and we're going to go on after a little poll to what is to be revealed. Daniel Guzman Vargas, who will wave, will introduce you to the ReVeAL project, what we're doing, how it works. And then we go on to Koos Fransen, who will also wave, from Gent, where he will explain ReVeAL through the vehicle of one of our case studies, the Gent UVAR. So explain it a bit more real, so you can kind of understand a bit better. Then our wonderful Bonnie will be gathering up all the questions and answers, gathering the questions, and we'll look to answer them at the end. So enjoy the webinar. If you want to know about future webinars, and if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to the newsletter. It's on the top right of our homepage. And over to Bonnie with the poll. I think Bonnie's going to. Bonnie, we can't hear you.
Good. Start with the mute button. I'm a professional at this.
We can hear you now.
So we do have just a couple of questions as we go through, just so we can find out something about you, and you can also find out something about one another. So here's your question. And we'll just give you a couple of moments to fill in your answers before I close it up on you. Give you another second or two. They're coming in, but and I will also close the poll and You should be able to see the results if I'm not mistaken. So just to give you an idea where everybody's coming from, most of the people here are NGOs or consultancies, and a few researchers and also some local administration, which is a good mix for us, I think. I just wanted to toss in one more question, Lucy, if you don't mind, before we get to, actually, I've got one, I've got two more questions since we're at it. For the second one, rather than working in the poll question, in the poll box, we'll ask you to write into the space where it says questions. We're curious to know where everybody comes from. And this is if you can just put in the question box rather than a question and answer, and that would be the city and the country that you're from, then we'll have some ideas about where everybody comes from as well. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, you can see it's already started to come in. Oh boy, Buffalo, London, Italy, Kaunas, Strasbourg, Luxembourg, I can't even keep up. We'll share this with everybody afterwards as well, so you can also see where the others are from. Okay. And I'll find a way to share that afterwards, but meanwhile, Lucy, I'll turn it back to you and let you carry on. I better give you the screen back for that. Oh no, I'm giving the screen over to.
You're giving over to Daniel, because all
exactly
I would be
what
saying
I'm doing.
is Daniel. Now we're going to Daniel from the University of Ghent, who's going to give you an introduction to the ReVeAL project.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody see my screen at the moment?
I can't, but I don't know if that means everybody can't.
I assume everybody can then. I hope you can hear me clearly. So, yes?
Yep, carry on. Sorry.
Okay. So, hello once again. My name is Daniel. Thank you for the introduction. I'm a PhD researcher at Ghent University, and tonight or this afternoon, I have the pleasure of introduce to you what is this project we are having, which is ReVeAL, regulating vehicle access for improved livability. And so I'm going to tell you what is to be revealed basically in these following minutes. I think for some of you, it wouldn't be a surprise that there is a growing trend of mixed feelings across Europe and across the world, which is something that all the cities here in this map are familiar with over 700 urban vehicle access regulations, or UVARs, as we like to call it, across 24 European countries. Day to day, more and more people get familiar with the term UVAR, a term that has both lovers and detractors, but it's a term that is inspired in the love for cities and what they represent. So why UVARs? Why do cities use UVAR? Well, UVAR is used in some cities to reduce urban congestion, for the reduction of emissions because you have air pollution, noise because of climate change. Yes?
Daniel, can you make sure your screen is shared?
It's not shared.
Just double check.
Oh.
It'd be useful to know from any of the attendees if they can see the screen. Yep, now we can see it.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Off I go again.
Should I continue? Should I start again?
Maybe if you just briefly show us the others quickly through the
Okay. Once again,
right,
I'm really sorry.
Okay.
I'm really sorry for that.
That's okay.
So I have the pleasure once again. Hello, everybody. I have the pleasure to introduce to you all this project called ReVeAL. So as I say, there is something that won't be a surprise for much of you, which is there is a growing trend of mixed feelings across Europe and across the world. And there is something that this is the map I was showing. There is something that all the cities here in this map are familiar with. So we have over 700 urban vehicle access regulations, or UVARs, as we like to call it, across 24 European countries. And day to day, more and more people get familiar with the term UVAR. So why do cities use UVAR? Well, UVAR is used in some cities to reduce urban congestion, for the reduction of emissions because you have pollution, noise, because of climate change in general, to increase safetiness and livability and attractiveness of the urban area, sometimes as a source of income, and cause, in some cases, well, when it comes to carrots and sticks, well, sometimes carrots are not enough. So what is behind UVAR that inspires such a variety of feelings and emotions? While city administrators may think of UVAR as useful tools or useful regulations to achieve sustainable objectives, a variety of stakeholders, such as logistic companies or shopkeepers or vehicle and business owners, they see them as bans, and they see them as restrictions to their daily activities, and in some cases as limitations to their economic activities. In addition, examples of both successful and unsuccessful implementations, they set the ground for a heated debate, with some cities focusing on successful implementations in the hope that, well, that by replicating the good practices that had taken place in these cities, the chances of a successful development of their own UVAR measures, well, increases.
Daniel?
However, yes?
This seems like a good moment. I've got another question. Just, you're talking about these being a good idea, a bad idea, and we have a question prepared just to find out what people actually think about access restrictions. And I'm just going to throw this out here as a poll question.
Beautiful.
Okay, you talked about carrots and sticks and the preferences.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just give people a couple of minutes to start putting responses into this. I can see they're coming in.
Bonnie, maybe this is a good idea to say, Koos and I aren't seeing the rest of the chat from everybody. I don't know if that's an option. You could let us see it, and then we can help answer some of the questions.
Okay, it's not a chat right now. We're just getting the collections for the poll responses, and I'll show those in a moment. We've got 61% have voted. I wonder if we can get to 75% before I'll close it off. It looks like we have overall a relatively positive audience, I would say. And I will try and, okay, I'll give you one more minute if anybody wants to add anything. 70% of people have already voted. I'll keep the response. Okay, I'm gonna stop it now. They're still coming in. 72%. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll. If you're not there, then you're not there yet. And just to share the response with you, it looks like we have a fairly friendly audience for you, Daniel, anyway, for the most part, at least 60, so 2/3, great idea. And another quarter are open to the possibility. Okay, and 10% prefer carrots to sticks. I'll take that back, I'll let that go and turn it back over to you, Daniel. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That was quite interesting, actually. I want to know if everybody can see my screen again.
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay, so indeed, there are examples of both successful implementations, but some cities, they expect that focusing on these successful implementations, they're replicating the good practices that took place in these cities, well, they will increase the chances of a successful development of their own UVAR measures. However, well, there is a large variety of factors that play a role in the success of a city when it comes to implementing UVAR. There are factors that are intrinsic to each city, factors that are intrinsic to each UVAR measure, factors that need to be understood in order to determine if a specific practice is applicable or not for a city in question. So to illustrate this, if you allow me, let's take a short look at the city of Stockholm, Sweden. In 2006, Stockholm introduced their own congestion tax. This was a time-of-day dependent cordon-based congestion charging system with the aim of reducing traffic and congestion, enhance accessibility, and improve the environment. This measure was initially launched as a half-year trial, followed by a public referendum in which 53% of the citizens supported the measure. Along the same lines, on the first day of 2013, Gothenburg introduced its own congestion tax, this time with the aim of alleviating congestion, improve air quality, and generating revenues for transport infrastructure. Several consultants and officials, and even some of the experts that participated in the development of the Stockholm congestion charge were participants in the design of the Gothenburg congestion charge. In 2014, 20 months after the introduction of the Gothenburg congestion tax, a local referendum was held in the city of Gothenburg, with around 57% of the citizens voting against the congestion tax. So we have the 53% pro congestion tax in Stockholm and the 57% against congestion tax in Gothenburg. So although the public approval of the Gothenburg congestion charge has increased since its implementation, reaching an approval of about 51% in 2014, the maximum since its implementation up until 2017, which is the date I'm disclosing now. The approval rate has never been remotely close to the acceptance rates of the Stockholm congestion tax, with approval rates of up to 70% during the following years after its implementation. The implementation of this congestion tax in these two cities then is the perfect example, the perfect illustration of how two cities with relatively the same cultural, social, and legal context may display different processes with different outcomes in terms of political and public acceptance. So this showcases how important results then to consider these various procedural contextual factors that I was initially mentioned, factors that play a role and that are intrinsic to each UVAR measure, and how important it is to consider them when implementing UVAR in a specific city. It will be useful then to have a way to reveal all of these factors, to bring them on stage and to see how they perform all together. And for that, we aim to present to you this project called ReVeAL. So ReVeAL wants to provide cities with tools to support a systematic and a coordinated way to develop best practices, to deliver innovation with regards to governance, to highlight and to synchronize different options for UVAR technology and services, to structure the way in which the mobility system and companion access regulation should be approached, to provide a better understanding on how to look at user needs and acceptance, and to highlight different ways to future-proof UVAR. I'm sorry. ReVeAL is an action research project that combines both desk research on international good and bad practices with empirical data and with expert knowledge that come from our partners, with on-the-field testing in 6 implementation cases, which are our pilot cities. All these through impact assessment and process evaluation to provide tailored UVAR support and guidance. For this, ReVeAL follows a 4-stage methodology. In the first place, ReVeAL uses the UVAR transition framework to make explicit the change and transition management requirements for any UVAR initiative. ReVeAL breaks up the UVAR puzzle to help you rebuild it according to your needs and to the needs of your cities. ReVeAL starts with UVAR building blocks in 4 major fields, which are the paths that lead us to zero emission zones or low traffic zones, spatial interventions, pricing measures, and future options, in combination with supporting complementary measures that aim to assist the implementation. The UVAR building blocks can build solutions from micro to micro scale, from traffic filters up to super blocks and zero emission zones. In this way, an UVAR solution for a city can be a combination of these building blocks, whilst the different complementary measures make sure of keeping them tied all together. Scrappage grant schemes, additional transportation offerings, such as delivery hubs or new bus routes, joint regulations and agreements, are just some of the complementary measures that can come in a variety of shapes and forms, acting as the glue that keeps the UVAR building blocks in place. But ReVeAL goes farther than that. ReVeAL goes even
You've got
farther than
about
that.
6 minutes left, six-ish,
Okay.
halfway through. So
ReVeAL decomposes the UVAR process through the UVAR transition framework, breaking it up into 4 transition areas that altogether describe the dynamics of UVAR, the contextual and procedural factors, and their interactions. ReVeAL understands how the effective use of technology, compatible with emerging mobility patterns and concepts, fits into modern governance structures that further lead and achieve public acceptance and city objectives. Whether you are trying to find the UVAR that best suits your needs and dreams in the UVAR ideation phase, or trying to fine-tune the design of your UVAR of choice in the UVAR design phase, or setting up all the necessary steps to launch your UVAR in the UVAR implementation phase, or whether your UVAR is already running or in the UVAR operation phase, the ReVeAL transition framework understands where your city stands, assessing its maturity with regard to the different UVAR phases, which you have here in blue, UVAR phases that make up the UVAR life cycle. ReVeAL understands, and the transition framework, ReVeAL transition framework understands where your city stands in this UVAR life cycle, understand what your city needs based on the phase you're at to help it get to the best end in its own UVAR implementation. The review of UVAR options and building scenarios take place in the second stage of the ReVeAL methodology to set the groundwork for the implementation of a wide range of UVAR measures, accounting both established and cutting-edge approaches. The UVAR options database documents UVAR measures in 8 city cases following the ReVeAL transition framework. A case study may have aspects of any or all of the measure fields combined. It can be a combination of zero emission zones, or it can be a combination of spatial interventions with pricing measures. The description of the measures in the case study will allow us to determine the degree of context similarity in order to match existing cases and the needs of new cities interested in UVAR implementation. One of these city cases is the case of Ghent and the circulation plan, which is coming after my talk by my colleague Koos. So stay tuned for that, please. This UVAR options database fits the scenario building. A scenario builds on a selection of ReVeAL options to a specific city context. The scenario building reflects the business as usual and different ambitions of the UVAR measures when implemented within the specific city context, so adapted to the specific city needs. The third stage of the ReVeAL methodology, which is the pilot, implementing, and testing. ReVeAL comes with 6 hands-on implementations that goes from the super blocks in Vitoria-Gasteiz to the low emission zone in Jerusalem and the low traffic zone in Padua. 6 pilot cities that provide a wide spectrum of UVAR measures with different maturity stages, and that will allow ReVeAL to test and to fine-tune its approach on the field. Additionally, ReVeAL comes with a thoroughly selected reference group, a diverse group of key stakeholders, a group of around 30 active members, including local government policymakers, transport service and solution providers, technology suppliers, and end-user organizations. This reference group provides a grounding and a reality check for the research and development partners to ensure that the project developments and findings are in line with expectations and priorities of the final users. The fourth and final stage of the ReVeAL methodology is the impact assessment and process evaluation. For this, ReVeAL comes with the ReVeAL evaluation framework. The ReVeAL evaluation framework aims to monitor the work process, providing both qualitative and quantitative data as a basis for a comprehensive evaluation, to detect patterns and to draw empirically founded conclusions, to identify transferable lessons about good practices and potentially also about issues to avoid, and to tease out recommendations both for practitioners and for policymakers. So this is then how ReVeAL takes the UVAR transition framework to make explicit the change and transition management requirements for any UVAR initiative, reviews the different UVAR options, and builds scenarios to set the groundwork for the implementation of a wide range of UVAR measures, accounting both established and cutting-edge approaches. All this through pilot implementation and testing, in which 6 cities will implement their innovative measures as on-the-ground actions, making use of impact assessment and process evaluation to understand the nature and extent of the impacts made by the UVAR measures introduced in these 6 pilot cities. All this results in the ReVeAL decision support system and option generation, a tool that will provide cities with tailored UVAR support and guidance. In this way, ReVeAL wants to help cities to implement better UVAR, adding urban vehicle access regulations to the standard repertoire. ReVeAL is here to spark, to implement, and to future-proof a new generation of UVAR approaches, encouraging sustainable transport choices, enabling cities to improve livability and optimize urban space and transport networks, and to facilitate the identification of the UVAR options and best practices. So I hope I didn't go beyond the time. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is UVAR. So I had to rush it a little bit, but thank you very much for joining us. And please stay tuned for the talk of my colleague Koos on the case of the city of Ghent and the circulation plan.
Many thanks for that, Daniel. You're virtually perfectly on time.
Perfect.
And we have Koos coming up with an illustration. The next talk is by Koos Fransen, also from the University of Ghent, and I'll hand over to you without delay.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I'm not sure, can you see my screen yet in full screen normally now? Should be fine.
We can see, hooray, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So good afternoon or evening, everybody. My name is Koos, and today I will shed some light on a case that we discussed in detail in the ReVeAL project, and this is the circulation plan in Ghent. And more specifically, we will look into the process behind the implementation of this specific UVAR. Now, to start, I would like to refer to a article, which is rather strange because it's a call to action by the British newspaper The Guardian to people living in Ghent, and they asked all people in Ghent to share stories and anecdotes on how the circulation plan or the implementation of the circulation plan has changed their lives. We as proud Ghentians, and yes, I also participated in this call to action, we only needed 3 days to reply in great numbers with a large amount of stories, positive stories, anecdotes. But for those people that share my interest in Ghent and live in Ghent, we all know that it's not as smoothly as you can read in all of these stories. So we chose Ghent within ReVeAL because it's an interesting story, because on the one hand, it shows people's and more specifically cities focus in a transition towards a more people-oriented city. But at the same time, it also shows the struggles that local authorities have, but also other actors such as citizens, local groups, organizations, shopkeepers, and so on, that they have in this process. Now, in ReVeAL, we divided, as Daniel has indicated, we divided the UVAR process or the implementation of the UVAR actually in 4 phases. The ideation phase, where the seed of the idea is planted. The design phase, where the idea is drafted into a plan, into a design. The implementation phase, where the idea or the plan is actually implemented, and then the operation phase, where the plan is in place and mostly also evaluation takes place. But before we dive into these 4 phases, I would like to focus on possible events that happen before what we define as the ideation phase, because these are interesting events that shape the context in which an urban vehicle access regulation takes place. For example, here on the upper left, you can see the Emil Brown Square. It's a picture of 1987, where there were still cars allowed. So now the view on the square is totally different. But 1987 is an interesting year because we already had a circulation plan in place in Ghent. Most people don't know. It's called the Lussen Plan, and well, it's no longer in place. It was withdrawn after 6 months due to heavy protest by local shopkeepers. And so this shapes the context because they already have some kind of knowledge, past knowledge in the implementation of circulation plan. And then on the right, you can see a cycling policy plan from '93. And for those that know Ghent, Ghent is a very cycling-oriented city. And it's interesting to see that already more than 25 years ago, Ghent was already thinking about cycling, and more specifically, how cycling can be an alternative to the car, not only for inner city travel, but also for travel from neighboring neighborhoods or municipalities to Ghent. So this already shapes or has an impact on the context where an UVAR can take place. Now, when we look into the actual ideation phase, or what we define as the ideation phase within ReVeAL, we see this as the drafting of the mobility plan for Ghent, which started in 2009 and was only finished in 2015. Now, this mobility plan had a strategic vision for Ghent, focused on sustainable mobility and an accessible city. And for example, one of the aspects in the mobility plan was the parking plan, which you can see on the upper right, which not only updated the outdated older plan, but it also is a first hint towards a broader policy vision on decreasing the number of cars in the city center, because, for example, in city center, so the red zone that you can see there, parking was limited and parking fees were high. In addition, in 2015, the new 30-kilometer zone was in place or was installed in the city center in Ghent. So again, hinting at the broader vision towards decreasing the number of cars. And it is within this context of this mobility plan that the alderman, Philippe Theo, for the city of Ghent, asked for a thorough, detailed plan, circulation plan, to be implemented or to be contained within the mobility plan in 2015. And this was actually the drafting of the ID. Now, with the acceptance of the mobility plan, as Daniel said, we have these gates between our different phases. With the acceptance of the mobility plan, we now are in our design phase. So the mobility plan containing the circulation plan is accepted. And now we are in the quite bumpy and rougher patch of the design phase, 2015-2016. And on the left, you can see the circulation plan, which is a combination of more punctual interventions, such as cutting through traffic, one-way streets, and other visual barriers, for example, in combination with a broader idea of having those colored zones in the different neighborhoods, and the idea is that people cannot travel between zones unless if they take the outer-lying ring road. Now, this, I said, a bumpier patch during the design phase, because in 2016, the beginning of 2016, the city started with their communication campaign. But at the same time, there was a counter action by a local action group called Mobiel Gent, later transformed into Intelligent, which was a combination of middle-class, liberal shopkeepers that were opposing the circulation plan. And they were later on backed up by the center right-wing political party, which is not one of the leading parties in Ghent, so one of the opposition parties. And they started petitioning for a referendum. And this is important because it also kickstarted the stronger participation in Ghent, because Ghent started focusing on having more in-depth dialogues with citizens, and this actually led to some amendments, some changes in the circulation plan when it was eventually accepted. And then we
you've
enter
got 5 minutes, Koos. You've got
okay.
5-10 minutes. So yeah, the reveal bit, just so you know time.
Okay. So then we enter the implementation phase. This is an example of one of the physical cuts. So the implementation started with a trial period of 1 month, and this trial period ended. And at the same time, here we had the summum of the reaction against the circulation plan with a referendum that failed. So the call for a referendum failed, but it was only by 673 votes, which is not much, given that they needed 10% of the population to have to vote for a referendum. So it was a close call, but it also enabled the city of Ghent to further kickstart their participation. Maybe also interesting is that they also added some complementary measures, so some things that counteracted the more restrictive policy of the circulation plan, such as, for example, the pedestrian bus you can see in the lower right. Now the circulation plan is still in operation, and there have been some evaluations. Those were mainly positive in general. So we have lower congestion, lower air pollution, and a more sustainable modal split. And this positive effect, or general positive effect, made the opposition back down a little bit. And at the same time, City of Ghent also started their burgerkabinetten, which are mixed meetings of around 150 people that also co-designed the circulation plan. There were 4 meetings in 2018, and they also led to some amendments to the plan. In addition, just as a side note, the City of Ghent has also instigated a low emission zone in the city center, and is thinking of extending this low emission zone. So again, an extension of this policy focus on decreasing the number of cars in the city center. Now, to conclude or to wrap up, why is this important for us in ReVeAL? In ReVeAL, we try to actually combine knowledge on these specific events or things that happened with expert knowledge in the ReVeAL team to define what could be possible pathways to implementation of an UVAR strategy in other cities, such as, for example, as Daniel said, in the pilot cities that are also in ReVeAL, but also in other cities that might be interested. We see this in 2 ways. One way is through what we call building blocks, which we see in different measure fields. For example, a spatial intervention such as a roadblock can be combined with some pricing measures such as updating the parking scheme. And all of these combinations is what we see as constituting the UVAR strategy that we are trying to unravel. At the same time, we're also trying to look into specific events in different transition areas. For example, if we would see that in the City of Ghent, governance is an important aspect within our design phase, then this is something to take into account when we are trying to support other cities in a successful story. To conclude, I would like to go back to my first 2 slides and the Guardian, because why did they actually ask people to respond and to share their ideas and stories on the City of Ghent? And I think it's important to note that this was actually to support an idea in Birmingham, and Birmingham, for those familiar with the UK, is known as the motorway city in the UK, and they are transitioning their city center to cut through traffic, and they are using the circulation plan of Ghent as a good practice example. And this is exactly what we try to do in ReVeAL. We try to take good knowledge or practice from from our case study cities, combine it with expert knowledge, and use these lessons learned to support other cities in their pathway to a urban vehicle access regulation strategy. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
There are, in fact, a couple of questions, Koos. I've been taking them as they've been coming in, and I'll just sort of take them one at a time. This maybe goes back, I'm not sure if the question is for you or for Daniel, but Giovanni Martino asked about CNG, and basically saying we know zero emission vehicles only move the pollution problem somewhere else. What about CNG from renewable resources? Would that be as opposed to zero emissions?
That's
Or
probably
Lucy,
one
that's
for me. Probably one for me. There are many different pathways. Zero emission vehicles electric vehicles have the advantage that it's a much more efficient engine. And what isn't good is having electric vehicles and a whole load of coal-fired power stations. So it's a balance. What in Scandinavia is quite often gas used, renewable sources, and it's great. It's part of the mix. It can't go from one to the other. And it's a question of looking at what your city's got, what the status quo is, and how you can get a sustainable package. So I wouldn't say one's good, one's bad. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I can maybe add for Ghent, because this is a discussion we've had with our colleagues many times, because a lot of us are also working on social justice issues, and this is something we also see in some specific aspects of the circulation plan. That, for example, in general, the congestion is lower, but some streets still have some issues, and this is something the city should continuously work at, I think, to try to improve this. For zero emission zones, low emission zones, social justice is commonly pointed out at, and I think it's important to note, but at the same time, for example, for Ghent, it's also important to note that this is part of a broader strategy. So it's not just a low emission zone, it's part of a policy towards decreasing the number of cars in the city center and increasing the sustainability and the livability. So I think it's important to note that it's always part of something bigger or something, a broader policy, and it's not just one measure. I think this is also something we would try to show and reveal, that we started with the circulation plan, but we cannot just say that, for example, low emission zone did not happen. It's also part of this policy. So I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I think it's important to note from the Ghent perspective.
I agree with Koos. I think what you say is perfectly right. The UVAR measures are never a standalone measure. They usually come as a part of a broader package, and the city is always trying. The idea is always to try and cover all the corners. It's a tool, but it's not the only tool.
And you're also, I'm increasingly seeing on the access regulations around Europe, it used to be a low emission zone or this or that, and it's increasingly them merging. You'll have a low emission zone with congestion, with traffic limitation. It'll all come through, and increasingly the spatial schemes to reduce the total traffic often use it as a complementary measure, or one. It's the idea of the building blocks, Lego bricks, to build them together to get something that works for your city. And the idea of ReVeAL is to help support cities deciding which Lego bricks to put with together. And
you're kind of, Lucy, just jumped here as well. I can see we do have a couple more questions, so but you're kind of going into the answer to the next one. I'll just pose the question so you can finish saying what you're saying, and I think that may be answering it. But Jim McGeever, hi Jim. He says he sees that ReVeAL is a Civitas project and is wondering what ReVeAL is doing beyond what's been done in other Civitas projects, including what Ghent has already developed. And I think you're already going in that direction, Lucy, so maybe I'll just let you continue, and we'll call that the answer to Jim's question too.
Some of the outputs of ReVeAL are tools to help support cities make the decisions as to how to develop UVARs. Is it right? Is it the right tool for them? A decision support tool, and the process that ReVeAL's got building blocks, which can include the different, we have zero emission zones or traffic limited zones, a regulation with rules, you have spatial interventions, you have pricing measures. We also have the concept of future proofing. We have these going downwards. If Koos goes back to the Lego brick presentation, because he's got the thing, and across this way we've got the transition areas. These are things you need to think about in every UVAR. The mobility concepts to make sure the city works and people can get there, user needs, make sure it works, governance and financing, and system design. So these come together with complementary measures to make sure things work, to make sure that any of the disadvantages are not so disadvantaged, and coming together to get the idea of ReVeAL is to provide a tool to help future cities take best practice. You can't, it's often not just a case of taking what Ghent did and plonking it in Birmingham. It's a question of saying which bits of it will work. Well, that won't work, this would work, and working out how you find what made that good practice bit right, what made it context, what works for you, and what ReVeAL's doing is going to provide at the end of this a tool to help support the cities. We've got the pilot cities to help validate it. We've got the reference groups also to help make sure we're on the right track, we're providing what's needed. So that's
sorry, I'm just because we've got more questions and I think, Daniel, can we say that Lucy's answered that one and I can move on to a couple? We have some interesting questions here. Here's one that's aimed maybe at Koos, if it's the Ghent perspective maybe, and this comes from, in fact, my colleague Lasse Brandt, who I know works a lot on SUMPs, and he is interested in how you dealt with opposition. So what do you do when this happens? You got your population is against you. Do you change your strategy? What happens?
How I deal, or how the city of Ghent deals?
How the city of Ghent?
With the opposition. Yeah, no. Well, it's a very complex story. I know, Daniel, you also had a lot of interviews. It's difficult because they had this opposition, and they started upping the stakes and upping the participation. But at that time, the ball is rolling, and you have opposition, and there are things that are not very clear in your plan. And I think for Ghent, it was very fortunate that they were 673 votes short, because otherwise it could have been a whole other story, and it could have been an unsuccessful story. So this is something also we try to see in ReVeAL, not only in Ghent, but in the other case study cities, is how do these, because Lucy told, yeah, we try to take which building blocks match, but we also want to see which events also triggered certain things. For example, I think this referendum is a trigger, and well, eventually it turned out fine, but I think it could also be a trigger for a unsuccessful story. So we try to capture these moments, and I think from a Ghent perspective, it started Ghent realizing that participation is more important, and I think you also see it very clearly in other things that they're doing now. But I think for the circulation plan, they already had this idea, and they were very keen on having this idea. And I think sometimes that's also necessary. So sometimes participation can slow things down, and sometimes you need this action-reaction to make things like very, very radical things, or what might seem radical, make it work. So it's a very complex story. How do you deal with opposition? I think the best thing is try to listen to why are they opposing your plan, and if it's valid and if it fits within your policy, then maybe how can you react, and how can you change your policy? For example, in Ghent, some aspects of the plan were changed because of participation. So I think that would be the maybe too broad, but maybe the best general answer to your question.
Okay, we've still got a couple more. We've got two that are related here, questions, both with regard to, I will say the one is about freight transport. How is that done in a car-free zone? So that's the general question. There's also one specific to Ghent, but I imagine it would be similar in other places. So non-personal vehicles, delivery trucks, police, transit, and so on. How are those dealt with in the car-free zone?
Yeah, maybe I can start, Lucy, and you can, or Daniel, you can continue. Just for Ghent, it's based on, for example, a permit. If you have a company, you can have a permit to still enter the city center. So I think mostly in most examples it will be dealt like this. But I think Lucy has some very interesting things also to say on permits and exemptions. And so what was it? Personal vehicles and delivery, I think they're quite similar. Yeah, but maybe also interesting is that one of the things is also that there's other options. So for example, making a transition towards zero emission vehicles might be an option, or maybe transitioning to more active modes, such as, for example, delivery by cargo bike, could be other options, not just giving permits that are possibilities.
I think there is also something that relates to the previous question, and for instance, Ghent at the beginning, they had a design of how a technical design of how the circulation plan should work, and initially they deal with these exceptions by means of permits. Well, you have permits and you have exceptions, and Lucy is going to cover this after me, I hope, in a very good way. So they deal with this kind of specific cases by means of permits, but initially this design accounted for a certain amount of cases that will grant a permit. But this design was in the design phase, in the early stages, it was brought to the public, and there were comments on it, and there was feedback on it. And actually the amount of permits, it gradually evolved. And actually once it entered in operation, there was this Burger cabinet, which is the citizen cabinet, in which I think it was around 150 stakeholder representatives. They got together, and there were amendments to do these rules, and some permits were modified in certain way. So it kind of links a little bit in this case with the user needs and how to deal with the participation and the engagement of the citizens.
And it's also a highlight of what I was saying earlier. It's not a single scheme. If you're having a traffic-free or traffic-low scheme, you also have to have a permit scheme, a regulatory scheme to allow the vehicles in that need to be in. So you'd effectively get a traffic limited zone or a delivery scheme together with a car free, because the shop still needs to be delivered to. We have a document on exemptions and permits and explain the difference with them. And following on from your questions, I'll talk to our colleagues how we can maybe publish that. If you're interested in it, let us know, and we'll see if we can make that available to people.
One more question here related to that. Sorry, Lucy, I can see just because it's related, I'll throw it in now. Disabled access, they said Ghent specifically, but can we assume that there would also be permits or exemptions available for people with disabilities to bring vehicles in, Koos or Daniel?
Yes, of course, and in fact, there was one of the complementary measures that the city implemented, which Koos actually showed, which is and I think you have it in your slides, is the Wandel bus, which is a pedestrian bus, which goes around the city center at walking speed. That's why it's called the pedestrian bus. So it's a little electric bus, and it's intended for people with limited mobility, so they can reach A and B in between the city that is now cut. So to help the mobility with this this segment group.
I think more important than an exemption per se is a way of enabling people to get there. So in some countries there's a quite a broad, the blue badge is quite broad and it's quite easy to get a blue badge. There's people that maybe have more severe mobility, so that can become also an issue, but the most important thing is enabling the access.
It sounds like, again, coming back to what Koos said as well, that making sure that you listen to what people say and take their issues seriously so that people don't end up in a fear situation, I think, and thinking they won't be able to have access or that their mobility will be limited, so that there are options available. And just looking at the time, Lucy, there are a couple more questions. What I would suggest is that, and they keep coming in, so I'm not sure this is going to end. We've got them noted though, and we will be happy to send responses by email to the 2 or 3 people that we haven't been able to answer questions for, if that's okay.
Yeah, and sure. The webinar will be recorded, and the presentations will be online, and so will the 3 speaker email addresses. So you can also contact us if you have a question that's after the cutoff, that when Bonnie cuts the chat off.
Yeah, and we have just a brief questionnaire evaluation that you'll be asked to fill out when you leave this. If you wouldn't mind taking 2 minutes to do that, we'd be grateful too. And you can also put in questions there, and we'll be happy to respond to those as well. Well, I speak for Lucy, Daniel, and Koos, who will be happy to respond to your questions. I'll just pass them on.
Of course.
Many thanks for attending this webinar. We hope it's interesting for you. We hope that you will come to the next ones, and I hope you find the output of ReVeAL useful.